it's actually sort of the not really. I don't really need regulatory clarity. It's more of a the only thing that regulatory clarity is going to bring, in my opinion, that's going to change anything is more that unpredictable factor of what could happen that's not being anticipated. Regardless of whatever happens, I believe in XRP and the XRP ledger as a whole. It's
Mhm.
just one of those things where if you're looking at it if you're looking at it from a perspective of a retail trader, there could be a regulatory stance in which regular retail traders couldn't hold the token, and that's really strictly from a regulatory standpoint
Mhm.
or a retail standpoint. If you were a enterprise of any sorts or anything like that, I still would believe in the technology and the token as full through and through. It's just if you are a retail trader, or if you're somebody who's not going to be using, if you're not going to be going through the regulatory clearance needed as a enterprise, you're going to need to be concerned for some of the regulatory things that are coming forward. Now, if you're going to be someone that wants to enter that space and go through whatever regulatory hoops that you need to go through, I don't see any problems with XRP as a whole in regards to the technology. It just depends on where you are in regards to managing that regulatory stance. Well, because Ripple is such an established company, and because Ripple is like so big, when it comes to any sort of regulatory clarity, not only to enforce on XRP, but as on the space as a whole, I think they're kind of just using Ripple as the example to set the stage for everything else. Now, this does pose risk, like regulatory risk, towards all the other tokens. But what I'm actually really trying to say is a lot of these other tokens were built for these regulatory risks, and if they were going to have the same problems that Ripple and XRP had, they would have basically been put into a group for that. And if you actually look at the SEC lawsuit, the main reason why Ripple's being sued isn't so much because of XRP, the technology. The one reason that they're getting sued is because when they did like their Series C's round, they did their Series C round and raised like $100 million. They gave their investors XRP, and then that basically looks like an investment contract, and that's essentially what rolled out this SEC lawsuit. So when people say like, well, what about these other tokens, and it comes to clarity, one, I actually a lot of these other tokens were built with that type of clarity in mind. Not all of them, but some of them. And the ones that haven't, and they haven't really been addressed yet, I think the biggest thing when it comes to clarity is going to come in with this Ripple lawsuit, as opposed to additional lawsuits being issued out like later on. And I don't even think the main risk is with the tokens and the companies of the tokens. I think the main risk is going to be regulatory, whatever the regulatory stances on exchanges are. Because I think one thing that's kind of crazy is exchanges are almost operating like digital banks right now, but it's almost like people are focused more on the companies that are creating the technologies and not this weird middle ground of what is digital finance and what is an exchange's role in digital finance and where does that regulatory play. Like, I think that's a way bigger problem to be had than a simple lawsuit against an American company that uses blockchain technology. There are a lot of people in the space that aren't developers, but they're like financiers. So
Mhm.
they hire developers to do the finance thing. So I'd say there's really almost more like finance people in the space. And I don't mean it in like a trader sense. I mean like investment bankers, hedge fund managers, people like that in the space trying to like utilize the technology for their own use cases than there are just general sort of, and that's kind of like, I think that's kind of like by design due to how the industry sort of works. But you do see more of, and it's not that these people aren't technical, they're just more, there definitely seems to be a bigger finance space than there is a developer space. So R3 using the Corda platform, the Corda platform has a series of features known as Corda Settler. And
Right.
Corda Settler allows you to do off-chain settlements on the Corda blockchain and be able to have integrations that go along with that. Well, one of the main Corda Settler tokens is XRP. It's one of the primary blockchain technologies that's currently being used as Corda Settler as a settlement token, and it was primarily one of the first ones because it did the job of Corda Settler really well in regards to integrating with other blockchain technologies or distributed ledger technologies. So this is something that's been in the works for a while now. This isn't like new. This isn't like when they built Corda Settler. One of the first things they did was where they built it around and with XRP as a settlement token on top of all the other settlements that you can issue with it. But with that being said, and this kind of goes into XRP being used as a whole, XRP is a settlement token. And part of the reason why Corda is so important with this is because you can use that off-chain settlement. You can use XDC and the Corda platform to create smart contracts that are native to your business needs, and then be able to have an external settlement token that's essentially universal with all the other business needs, that you don't have to use your smart contract tokens to pay with. Use the settlement token. And that settlement token isn't just XRP. It could be XLM. It could be a simple, the Corda platform's already settled with the Swift GPI wire framework. So you could settle a Swift payment over Corda just as you would settle an XRP payment or a Bitcoin payment or whatever it may be. But XRP being interoperable with Corda Settler and Corda has been a thing for quite a while now. It will be a thing in the future. It will probably be an even bigger thing in the future. But yeah, absolutely. Corda will be using XRP, and not because they want to use XRP. They'll be using XRP because other people are using XRP. It's just a settlement. So it's not that they're like, huge advocates for XRP. And I bet a lot of people saw the lawsuit between Ripple and R3. And it's kind of funny because in my opinion, it's more of a petty drama between $2 billion companies that didn't realize they had billions of dollars on the table till after the fact. So somebody sued. But a lot of people see that and think like, oh no, does this mean they don't know? They're very much interoperable with each other. And Corda's been using XRP as a settlement token in Corda Settler for quite a while now. One thing about Cardano, and this actually sort of like, I wouldn't say it goes so much for Flare because I got in on the Flare group, but because I can't really touch the Cardano smart contract platform, and you can sort of deal with the like integrated payments so you can pass around the ADA token, I've kind of just never got into it because if I can't get my hands dirty, it's like, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit there and read about it all day? So until Cardano goes live or I can get access to their test network, I don't really have much to say. And it goes the same for Flare a little bit, but the only difference is I was able to get in the Flare network and I was able to set up some of the Flare test nodes, so it's sort of a little bit different. But something like Cardano, I just can't get my hands dirty with it, so I don't really have too many opinions about it. Actually, so I would probably accuse BitTrue of doing something like this, just because I know they operate off of the XRP ledger. So if you're operating off the XRP ledger, you're able to access the order books of anybody else that's operating off the XRP ledger. So with this being said, it's really easy for an exchange like BitTrue or a big exchange to run arbitrage between multiple other exchanges, not only because they have a huge inventory of orders in their order book with a set of prices, but they can compare all those orders with all the other exchanges that are operating off the decentralized ledger too, and then be able to match up those prices. And since it's so cheap that their spreads could be so thin, but they could still have huge profit margins because of the volume that they're able to pump through there. So I have no doubt in my mind that if they're operating on the XRP ledger, I hands down believe so, because it's one of those things where they could tap their order books into a global network of order books from other exchanges, and then be able to have almost endless liquidity, because they don't have to necessarily be entirely bound to the size of their network. They have the entire global network of the decentralized exchange to tap into. And like I said, they already have enough assets, they already have enough volume, and they already know what their traders are doing to be able to capitalize off those spread differences, no matter how small, because of how cheap the transactions are. This is something people need to take into consideration when they look at proof of work systems, because this is sort of where I came down the rabbit hole of this problem. And I was sort of like dumbfounded that you could mine Bitcoin back in 2010, no problem, made a couple Bitcoin and be incredibly wealthy right now. But if you wanted to mine Bitcoin right now, you would need a ever increasingly larger and larger processing unit to do so. And it just asked me the question of, well, at what point does it stop scaling upward and it levels off to be able to plateau to be able to run a network? So I kind of just, I wouldn't even say like crunch the numbers. I kind of just did some basic math, sort of equating the amount of power used to scale it from where it was in 2019 in the hash power to where it is now in the amount of power growth. And if you do that it follows an exponential curve. Like, you could plot the curve out perfectly. And if you keep doing that outward, by the time you get somewhere between 5 and 10%, you don't have enough power on the planet to maintain the amount of power that needs to go into the system to execute the Bitcoin network. And people like to make this excuse that like, oh, well, all these other systems are all incredibly energy intensive. Also, what makes Bitcoin so wrong? And it's not that Bitcoin uses a ton of energy, which is a problem. It is that Bitcoin energy scaling problem that gets exponentially worse the more people that are on the network. And it's one of those things too. There's a few things that come with that, but the main point is that. And then you can kind of go into speculating of, well, what would happen if it wasn't, if it wasn't economically viable to run on the network anymore, or what would happen if there was a consolidation event and one node ran a 51% attack because it's not economically viable and people left. Like, there's so many different avenues that you can go down that's based off this one fundamental problem, and it only gets worse too if you get into like the tether thing, because if you pull liquidity from the network and the value drops. One thing I also stated before too is there's a hypothetical value out there that the miners needed to be able to continue mining Bitcoin profitably, or nobody will be able to. So there are a few, and this all comes down to the scaling problem. It really does come down to the overall energy scaling problem that create all these other bubble problems out from it. And there is no, like, people like to say that there's a solution in the Lightning Network and some other stuff too. And it's one of those things where yeah, the best way I could describe it is, imagine like having your uncle, right? And he's got his like old like Chevy truck from the 80s that he loves so much. And he's like, look, like, whatever you have to say about it, we could just make it new. We could update it. And to yourself, no, there's no amount of anything you can put on that truck that's going to make it run like a new Prius. Like, I'm sorry. Like, you could put a Prius engine in there and it'll still run like a freaking truck. Like, and that's essentially where Bitcoin is. Bitcoin's in a position where the fundamental architecture of how it was built out, and it's kind of funny too, because I actually have my own suspicions that whoever built Bitcoin knew this problem, and I think they launched it out there because they have a better system already. Because if you wanted to say Satoshi Nakamoto was so smart to create the Bitcoin network, you can honestly, like, you can't say that he wasn't smart enough to realize the scaling problem in the math of the system he created. Like, you could write out the problem on the math of a napkin and find out how much power it would take over so many people using the network, solely based off the amount of people that use the network the first year, and how the hash rate changed. Like, it's kind of crazy that people don't talk about it, but I think it is one of those things where I think if people talked about it, it could actually cause people to panic, because it's one of those things where most people aren't really accustomed to the math of it, but it doesn't take a genius to realize that something can be mathematically improbable, and it's very easy to tell that it's mathematically improbable, even though you may not know the technical, algebraic formulation that causes that improbability. And I think that's why people don't talk about it, because I think people are genuinely scared that may be the case. And you may call me wrong, whatever, but that doesn't change the fact that if that is the case, there's a huge problem with proof of work systems as a whole. And it's something, like I said, people don't talk about it, but it's an inevitability. And one thing that you actually see now is you'll actually see a strain on the electrical infrastructure before you saw that problem of us not having enough power to run the Bitcoin network. You'll see them short out their local electrical infrastructure way before you see there not being enough power to run the Bitcoin network, because it's so power intensive. There is a fundamental problem with proof of work that breaks all of this into everything. And the problem is it's in proof of work. So what ends up happening is you have all these nodes competing for the Bitcoin by being able to crack the hash. Well, one cracks the hash, gets the Bitcoin, and the rest of them just completely wasted whatever electricity they had. And there's no amount of extra network that you could put onto this that would basically eliminate all that extra wasted energy from all the nodes that essentially didn't do anything other than compete to try to basically crack the hash. And unless you wanted to rewrite the Bitcoin code to be something else, there's no real, like I said, it's like the Chevy. It's like, well, what if we change the Chevy to not be a Chevy anymore? Well, then it's not a Chevy anymore. Like, the way I like to look at things, and I've been following the Fed for like the whole interest rates meme for a really long time, and it's literally just like that for anything. So if they say they're going to do it in 2025, well, sure, cool, but then they could all of a sudden one day say, we're doing it today, guys, and there you go. And then the next day they could say we're totally stopping that, even though we said we're. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, sure, there are plans, but anything can happen at any time, because that's kind of what ends up happening anyway. One thing you see with ISO in general, so ISO, the new ISO, the 20022 system now, it was actually proposed in 2004, and it was originally going to be adopted in like the late 20 teens, and a lot of European countries adopted it. But the main gist of it is, and you see this with the cryptos, but this also goes for general payments, is that standard right now. The current ISO standard is a Swift standard, so Swift dominates that standard. I forgot what the exact number was, but Swift is primarily like the number one person on that standard. This new standard, it's essentially broadening the standard, but at the same time narrowing it to be essentially a set of categories to where all the banks in the world can essentially interoperate with each other without having to worry about being able to accept said payment. Where before they would typically be going through Swift. Not all of them would go through Swift, but a big chunk of them would be. So it basically set the standard. But I think the thing with ISO that's going to change is I think Swift had a stronghold when it came to international trade and international commerce because of before the internet and moving from the before internet times to the internet, Swift was that solution to create that e-commerce, cross borders payment. But Swift is slow in comparison to what we have now. So I think what the new ISO system is essentially just utilizing newer technologies to essentially do what the broader backend to do what the broader backend payment sector already did. Now, this doesn't mean Swift's going to be gone. It means Swift is just going to be adopting the same ISO technologies that any of these other companies would be adopting. I just think that the number one thing that comes into common with these technologies is they're able to be fast, they're able to be standardized, and I think the next thing is there's going to be a certain level of automation, which brings into the cryptos and why they're important. Right now, Swift is essentially just a corporate entity that's running a bunch of people that's running a bunch of people. But if you're able to create a automated system where you had one bank's automated system interact with another bank's automated system, you get a lot better interoperability between the two banks, but you also get better efficiency because you don't have to have people managing people, and then you have less errors because people make errors, obviously. But yeah, you're able to essentially get a level of automation. I think that's the real utility of the ISO is it's going to be a new messaging payment system that's standardized, but also be able to integrate a standard open automated platform or automated messaging system that can operate with multiple platforms. Yeah, but I think the thing is the demand is already here. It's just the demand is already here. It's just the appliance for it isn't. And what I really mean by that is when it comes to any of the banks operating off this ISO standard, they can use these tokens. And if you look at some of the partnerships that some of these tokens have, a lot of financial institutions do use these tokens, but they're using them to a minimal degree as opposed to their total portfolio. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's not like all of a sudden they're just gonna flip demand and all of a sudden everybody's just gonna be using these tokens. But you're going to see a broader build in demand. And I think that build in demand is already priced into the token price because they're using it. So I think the thing that really is going to determine a new case of, I guess you could say, broad demand is if there was some sort of announcement or some sort of federal economic policy basically stating X, Y, and Z in regards to either the tokens themselves or the processes that will use the tokens. But I think everything as a whole will be getting priced in anyway. So you would end up seeing price movement for a lot of these tokens way before you saw the announcement being priced in due to use case. And I don't think it's going to be as crazy or dramatic as a lot of people think it is. I don't think it's going to be just a one day overnight thing. I think it can be with an announcement. If the Federal Reserve put out some sort of announcement saying, here's the new banking structure, everything else is out the window, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But as a whole, I think what you'll end up seeing is, I guess the best way you could put it is, you'll end up seeing a overall, I guess you could say, a utility bull run of all the institutions that are currently using the technologies, fighting to use what's left of the technologies, and then whatever's left for the retail is essentially going to dictate that last little bit of price. Because, like I said, if they're already using the tech, then the fact that the price is going up doesn't negate them from being able to use the tech. And the fact that other people are getting into the technology doesn't do anything for them to use the tech. So if they're already using it, other people using it doesn't drive up your demand as a whole. You know what I mean? And the price going up just allows you to have more liquidity in the tokens that you already had. So like I said, so it's not like you really need more demand. Demand's already there. It's just you start adopting more and more and more of it because you know you can essentially go about using these technologies in a regulatory safe way, but also be able to use them to the full extent that you're able to use them. Because right now, part of it too, it goes into this Metcalf effect, where you need a network to operate in order to utilize the overall like value of the network. And if not everyone's using it, then using it doesn't give you that maximum value. So the more people that use it, it's almost like the demand stays the same, but as more people use it, the supply dries up. So the price goes up because the demand is the supply is getting dried up as the demand staying the same because of that broader adoption. And because the supply is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, you'll see the price move further and further and further because of that. It's almost like the general floating supply, because you got to remember, if this is used as a currency, a lot of the XRP is going to be sitting on a bunch of balance sheets. So like the fact that it's sitting as the store of value and as a like payment mechanism on the balance sheet of a bunch of companies doesn't negate the overall use case. But because they need it on their balance sheets to be able to use it when they need to use it, it sucks up a ton of the supply until there's a very, very, very thin circulating supply on either the exchanges or in basically exchanging in such a manner that's not directly involved in direct transactions for some form of purchase. Usually, if it's usually involved in some sort of broader exchange, like on an exchange, because like it's almost like how you if you almost look at dollars, right? The majority of dollars aren't sitting around floating around in people's hands or in bank accounts. They're literally sitting on some balance sheet somewhere as some sort of representation of value for some company to tap into later. And that's the exact same thing is going to happen with XRP. The majority of XRP out there isn't just going to be sitting around floating around between people doing petty transactions. It's going to be on the back end books for settlements for big organizations. And it's mostly going to be not really sitting, because a lot of it's going to be moving, but it's going to be, a lot of it's going to be accumulated on, it's going to be sitting, it's the same way dollars are sitting on a balance sheet, the same way XRP will be sitting on a balance sheet in the future. And there's going to be a lot of XRP on a lot of different balance sheets being ready to be used for instant payments. And because they'll be sitting on those balance sheets, that circulating supply for just general XRP, just for the sake of having XRP, as opposed to just using it to, me paying my bills from another company in XRP, that little bit floating around is really going to cause that supply demand. If you wanted to get XRP, that's really where it comes down to. If you wanted to get XRP, you have to go through somebody who has XRP. And if you have XRP, you're not just going to give up your XRP because you're using it for enterprise uses. You see what I mean? So that's where the supply keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking while the demand stays the same, because everyone's going to go, I already have XRP, I'm not going to get rid of it. While the new people are going to go, I need XRP to use my enterprise. Where is it? And price is going to keep on going until it finds a place to level off at.